Freedom of human will is a subject widely debated and intensively debated in the Western philosophy, and beautifully debated. This is also a subject of the natural sciences today. The scientists among themselves have differences on whether we are having true choice, true freedom of will. One of the theories doing the rounds is determinism, which believes that every decision taken by us is determined or predetermined by various factors, including the genes, the education, the environment, the circumstances. These factors very seriously restrict our freedom of the will. Apart from determinism, this theory says, based on certain experiments, that before taking any conscious decision, there is an unconscious process preceding it, which suggests that the choices made by us is determined by those unconscious processes, subconscious processes. Therefore, they believe that our decisions, our decision making, the freedom of will, is seriously restricted. There is another theory doing the rounds that is called libertarianism, which says that, based on the quantum mechanics, which believes that the particles, the subatomic particles' path and direction cannot be predetermined, cannot be even predicted, because it's very erratic. And maybe similarly, our mind is sometimes behaving in the way the subatomic particles behave, and the decisions taken by us are not exactly predictable and predetermined. But this theory is not only because of lacking in scientific base as regards the human mind, but also because if the mind really behaves like an atom and the subatomic particles, it would not be a free choice truly. It would be a random choice, which cannot be really called and truly called freedom of will. Therefore, there is another theory which is a kind of balance between the two, which is called the compatibility theory, compatibilism, that freedom of choice, freedom of will, and determinism together constitute the truth. Our decisions are surely influenced by our background, education, environment, and impulses, emotional impulses, and our genes also. But we still have a veto. We can veto our impulses, and that is the freedom that we have, we enjoy. The same thing is said in the Bhagavad Gita in different terms, different words, in a different way. Let me explain to you that there are 3 or 4 mutually apparently contradictory sayings in the Bhagavad Gita as regards the freedom of human will. At the end of the conversation between Arjuna and Lord Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord tells Arjuna, don't worry, you're going to win, because I have already scripted the end of all your enemies. So you have just to become an instrument in the hand of God's will. So please fight and you will win. Now it's very reassuring truly, but the question that it gives rise to is quite serious. One may ask, if humans are an instrument in the hands of God's will and nothing else, they don't enjoy any freedom of will. God has already scripted what is going to happen, whether we are going to lose or win, and we are being made to act like actors in a drama in a worse situation, because the artist in a drama, the actor in a drama, knows how the script is written. But here we don't know the script. This conclusion is not fine. This is an exceptional circumstance. God has incarnated himself, and he incarnates himself in a human form very rarely, when there are very special circumstances. Therefore, when he has already incarnated himself in the form of Lord Krishna, so he is in charge of the entire sequence of events. This is an exceptional case, and we should not go by this exceptional circumstance. Now, in the same Bhagavad Gita, people will point out, he has said earlier, Prakritehi kriyamanani gunaihi karmani sarvashah ahankar vimodatma kartahamiti manyate. Actually, it is the nature and its gunas. Nature consists of 3 gunas. You can call them attributes, 3 attributes of nature, sattva guna, rajoguna, and tamoguna. So all our acts are determined by nature and its gunas. Now we know, as humans, we have 2 kinds of actions that we perform. One are involuntary actions and the other voluntary actions, voluntary acts. As far as involuntary acts are concerned, we are absolutely helpless. There is no freedom of will there. We have to blink, we have to breathe, we have to sleep, we have to eat, and we have to do many other acts which we cannot help. We are bound to do that. So to these involuntary acts and reflex actions, this verse truly applies, fully applies, that only Prakriti or only nature and its attributes are the real actors, and the person mistakenly thinks under false impression and under ego that it is he who is acting. The verse also applies largely, if not fully, to our voluntary acts. What choices we make is also determined very largely by our nature. A kind person will react in one way and an unkind person will react in another way to the same situation, because the nature of one person is kind and another person is not kind. Somebody is angry type, he will respond with anger, and the other fellow is calm, he will respond calmly. So nature keeps guiding us whether we are going for involuntary acts or voluntary actions. But again, there are certain factors which should not be ignored, which we will return to shortly. After these two verses, apart from many others, which show that there is some kind of determinism prevailing as regards freedom of will, which is more an appearance than reality, according to these two verses, there is a third very crucial verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and that will clarify many doubts. That is, na kartritvam na karmani lokasya srijati prabho na karm phala sanyogam svabhavastu pravartate. Neither the agency or the will to act, nor the act itself, and not even the consequences or fruits of the actions, none of the three are created by God. Then who creates? Svabhavastu pravartate. The person's nature is responsible for all three. Again, we return to nature, the micronature and the macronature. The micronature will determine the proclivity to act, willingness to act, the agency, and then the acts. And the macronature and micronature together will determine the consequences, when you will have the consequences. The greater nature will decide in this life or that life, you will get the fruits of those actions, good or bad. Therefore, here also nature comes into play. Here we must stop for a moment and become more receptive to a very novel idea. It's not found elsewhere, at least in the Abrahamic faiths. Therefore, we must listen to it carefully. According to the Bhagavad Gita, a man is a combination of soul, which is a point of consciousness, and a portion of God. So in effect, it is God itself, installed in a machine that is both physical and mental. The physical elements, the material, the body is made up of, and through this material nature, the biological brain, which harbors intelligence, ego, and the mind. So all these pertain to the domain of nature. And in this nature, there is a point of consciousness installed by God called soul. Now, there is nothing new about it. This is already existing in the Abrahamic faiths also, soul and the physical machine. What is new is that this soul, unlike the one found in the Abrahamic faiths, is supposed to be the portion of God. Not only that, as a soul, the soul neither acts nor reaps the consequences of actions. The soul doesn't commit any sin. It doesn't. It is God. It is not sinful. Nor does it face the adverse consequences of the sins committed. So neither it does nor it suffers. It can't suffer because it is God. God is beyond all suffering. So what is the situation like then? It doesn't act. So who acts? We will come to that. Now the things will be understood better. According to the Bhagavad Gita, this entity called soul, a portion of God, is a kind of actor which has forgotten its true nature, that it is divine, it is God, and it is flung into the creation just to carry on the cosmic drama of creation. The so-called decisions or choices are not made by the soul. So that is called the real self, soul, and technically Akshar Purush, the self that is indestructible self, the soul, the real soul. And around the indestructible soul, Akshar Purush, nature has created a casing which is made up of ego, intelligence, and mind. Now, this is the self that takes the decision. Unreal self, made up of elements of nature, subtle elements of nature. And it is this destructible self, Kshar Purusha, which takes all the decisions, makes the choices, and it is called Jiva. Jiva versus Atma. This Jiva is the one that acts, commits sins or meritorious acts, and suffers all the consequences of its bad and good deeds. It suffers. But soul cannot suffer because soul is God, a portion of God, and God is beyond all suffering. So the suffering that we undergo, as far as the soul is concerned, is an illusion. The suffering is suffered by the unreal self. That is called Kshar Purush. And the day we learn to separate the two, the day this casing is broken by the soul, the real self, it becomes liberated. It goes back to its real home, its real abode, divine abode. It is freed of all suffering. It is freed of rebirth. But till then, it undergoes the cycle of rebirth, death, and so on and so forth, till almost practically infinity. Therefore, the question of whether we have freedom of will basically pertains not to the soul but to the self, that is empirical self. Now, this has many layers, empirical self. Let's go to the psychology of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita says, in fact, before that, let me mention that in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjun asks a very, very important question which all of us would like to know the answer of. The question is that, Lord, why it happens that we don't want to commit a sin and still we are by force made to commit a sin? Who forces us? To this, the Lord replies that it is anger and it is desire, uncontrolled desire. Now, God says that this desire and this anger resides in 3 places: mind, ego, and intelligence. Intelligence is a word which is slightly inappropriate here because it combines knowledge, true knowledge, and wisdom. So let's conceive intelligence as both intelligence, wisdom, and true knowledge. It's a complex phenomenon, intelligence. We are in a battle. The battlefield is our own mind, body. We are into a battle, and the battle is between 3 forces: our sense organs, which drive us towards committing sins or otherwise also, then the mind, and then intelligence combined with wisdom and knowledge. Of the 3, God says in the 3rd chapter itself, the last 2 verses are very important. They show us how to augment our freedom of will. Not everybody has same degree of freedom of will. Those who are blindly driven by their emotions and their sensual passions without developing their wisdom and intelligence, they are practically making no choices. They are like animals. A lion doesn't make a moral choice. Moral choice can be made only by a person who has some developed intelligence, some conscience. And the person who doesn't have this is practically an animal in the form of a human being. Therefore, God in the last two verses of chapter 3, He gives you a way to freedom of will. How do we exercise freedom of will in the greatest degree? Limitations will apply, yes. Genes will apply. Genes will restrict you. Emotional drives will restrict you. Your upbringing will restrict you. Environment will restrict you. And yet you will be able to veto them. That veto power is called the freedom of choice. How do you acquire that? That is the greatest question. Now, I will recite the two verses in Sanskrit and then I will tell you the meaning of those two verses. Indriyani paraniyahu indriyabhyah param manah mansah tu para buddhi yah buddhe partah tu sah. Above the sense organs is the mind, which is greater power than the sense organs. And above the mind is intelligence combined with knowledge and wisdom. That is more powerful, that can be potentially more powerful than mind and senses both. And above that intelligence is the soul. But that is beyond the peripheries of nature. So we are practically left with, for the moment, intelligence, mind and sense organs. Now, life is a battle between these three wrestlers. Of these three wrestlers, if the wrestler called sense organs are most powerful, then they will subdue your mind and subdue your intelligence, and they will have their way. This can be very sinful. The second possibility is that your mind is more powerful than your intelligence and sense organs. Then also there is a problem, because mind doesn't have any headlights. Intelligence is the headlight of this car. It can crash anywhere. Therefore, we have to ensure that our intelligence, which is in any case above these two, becomes truly strengthened. This wrestler becomes so powerful that it can easily defeat both the mind and the senses. If we achieve that state, then this is the person, this layer of your personality is the one that makes choices. Remember that. That is most entitled to making free choices. So then it can, by subduing the mind and subduing the senses, make better, freer choices. An animal doesn't have that reflective, introspective intelligence. It only has its mind and its sense organs. So whatever impulses come to it, it acts according to that. But human beings can always veto their impulses. In sum, we have a freedom of choice, which is why our acts can have moral quality. And the path is that strengthen your knowledge, introspective knowledge, be reflective, and then strengthen your intelligence to make conscious and more informed choices. Then you will be able to exercise your true freedom of will.